European Unification by Jonathan, Raymond, and Zachary. The history of the European continent is one of the most fascinating stages of international relationships, where different powers repeatedly struggled against each other and eventually united together. The most brutal conflict that exemplified this pattern of international relationship was World War II, where, in Europe alone, an estimate of 65 million people were displaced, and an estimate of 15 to 20 million died. In the aftermath of this conflict, Europeans began to recognize the importance of establishing friendly international relationships to promote peace and integrate Europe as a whole so it is more competitive in the global market. The European Union was established in the post World War II recovery period, and it is a product of this European unity movement with leading countries of France and Germany. Throughout its history, the EU has experienced several expansions, especially after the fall of the Eastern Bloc. The fall of the Eastern Bloc and the collapse of the Soviet Union marked the end of the Cold War, which consequently enabled further expansion of European unity. Besides, several wars and conflicts occurred around the Mediterranean, such as the Bosnian War, the Arab Spring, and the Syrian Civil War, which has caused people to lose their shelter and were forced to migrate across the Mediterranean. However, this movement of European integration saw continuous decline.
Europe will become less unified over the next 30 years due to the rise of nationalistic right wing political parties, hostile international relationships such as the war between Ukraine and Russia, economic skepticism because of stagnant performance in recent years. As a result, disunity will be prevalent between European states in the next 30 years.
Euroscepticism involves doubting the unity of the EU. Over the past decade, we witnessed an increase in Euroscepticism doctrines due to the stagnation of the European integrated economy and augmenting economic inequality between members of the EU as it absorbed more Eastern European states. Besides, on a political lens, anti immigration due to the fear for social instability also inspires the growth of Euroscepticism as people are able to freely travel across the territories of the EU members, making it easier for those immigrants.
Similar to Euroscepticism, the amount of people that are doubting NATO have stayed at a consistent amount. This demonstrated the stagnation of progression toward unity because of the favorable opinion staying at a constant amount in recent years. Accordingly, after the Soviet Union has collapsed, this organization has lost its main enemy and therefore the motive for all its members to maintain its active participation.
Although many countries have a majority in favoring the EU, others, such as Greece, doubt the European Union, which could cause disunity within the Union, which will halt the unification progress within the next 30 years. Recently, in the 2022 to 2023 change among the members of the EU, the percentages that are favorable towards EU have mostly decreased among countries, which shows the advance towards less unity in Europe.
The image on the left shows the growth of nationalist parties within the EU members. Although some are small, the percentages are still very noticeable, and nationalism is a direct opposition to European unity. According to Mass Politics, this trend also reflects the growing Euroscepticism in the European population, which is shown through the support for nationalist parties. And then on the right is a picture of the Hungarian Nationalist Party. Within Hungary, the two nationalist parties had a combined percentage of votes won of 68%. This is a very dominant amount and it reveals how nationalism is overcoming pro-Euroism.
Because developed countries in Europe wants to maintain its economic advantage, countries that are less developed are not allowed to join the EU until they meet the standards. This shows how, although the EU may be unified, if all European countries are not able to join, Europe will not progress toward unification.
Although there has not been as much war and violence between European states since the end of World War II, there is still social disunity. This is because of sports teams that develop nationalistic ideals within the people. As a result of rising nationalism, antagonistic nationalism also rises, and this causes Europeans to dislike or hate each other just because of what sports and what sports teams they follow, which breaks down the social unity within Europe.
A soccer game that was supposed to boost national unity, and it ended up causing disunity because of these different sports teams. This shows the disunity within a country in the EU, and if the country itself cannot be unified, Europe as a whole cannot move towards unity.
Unified economy is one of the main advantage of the EU. However, this image shows the amount of protesters toward the economy, which could lead to further doubt in the EU and therefore foreshadowing the decrease in its unity.
This image is of the protests towards foreigners that were blamed for the chain of sexual assaults and robberies that have been happening. This demonstrates nationalism because they are blaming and trying to keep out all of the non Germans from Germany.
While modern athleticism promotes the removal of international borders, at the end of the day, every club and athlete will have their nationality. Today, glory and victory in sports are a great way to demonstrate the health and vitality of a state. In the names to pursue for athletic victory, sports became the spotlight to harness nationalism as everyone celebrates for the achievement of the athletes that of their same nationality. Besides that, athletic performance is a huge factor of nationalistic spirits in many countries. This is because of the competitive nature of sports. It has caused division between people of different states, and even within us, people are interested in celebrating the team and athletes that share a similar identity with them.
It is inevitable that nationalism is celebrated in the athletic world as the competitive nature of athleticism itself promotes ambition. No matter if it is the Olympic or World Cup, or for Europe specifically, the Euro Cup, we all see every team is specifically tied to a nationality. When the fans celebrate for their national team's victory, they are not only cheering for the achievements of the individual athletes, but also celebrating for their natural identity, while their state anthem is played and their national flag rises on the pole, not the flag of the union. This is a graph that illustrates people's attitudes toward the future of their state or region. For China, people are mostly optimistic about their future as they saw rapid economic growth in the past 40 years prior to China's economic reform. Conversely, Europe shows much less of an optimistic attitude towards their future. Because of the reforms in China, they are much more optimistic, but Europe's rate is very high because of their economic and social disunity.
Although Brexit was a result of both Britain's external and internal issues, it still broadcasts the fragility of EU structure. While the EU expands itself over the past decades, it is inevitable that it will cause a stagnant growth in its integrated market as it absorbs some countries that are less developed. Consequently, some of the more developed countries of the EU saw declining interest in the organization as their economies are dragged back due to the stagnation of the EU unified economy. This altitude was augmented by the COVID-19 pandemic as it causes the decline in the global economy and hence creating the disillusionment in the well-being of the EU's economy, which then inspired current and potential EU members to reconsider their interest in participating in the project of European unification.
The political unity of the EU made it the perfect destination for refugees, as once they got on any EU's member soil, they will therefore be able to go to any other EU countries. However, this provides a security issue because there's a lot of European countries that fear that a large scale of immigration will lead to cultural tensions because different cultures are merging. We can see this attitude from Iceland as they drop their interest in joining the EU because they are worried about all the economic and social issues that surface due to large scale immigration. Also, nationalistic leaders see a rise in European politics because they're able to criticize immigration and get a large audience that supports them.
Globalization has been the main trend over the past century due to technological advancement in communication and transportation. As globalization connects these, third world country labor is used more because of its price, allowing their economies to thrive. The competitiveness that it therefore augments causes job loss and industrialization in traditional manufacturing regions. As the EU absorbs more members, more will shift their industry to this. This is particularly harmful to France, as its industries are now placed at a disadvantage against those of less wages. Consequently, this contributes to the growth of anti-globalization and anti-EU attitude in France, as it is demonstrated by the popularity of the National Front Party, which is seen in this picture.
And is the motive for Russia to launch its invasion against Ukraine. as he criticizes Vladimir Putin for justifying Russian ambition toward Eastern Europe in response to the expansion of NATO post Cold War, and his desire to establish a common political entity that consists of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Therefore, this reflects the growth of Russian nationalism enforced from top to bottom and how it roots for Russia's hostile attitude towards its neighbor.
If you look through an ideological or an economic lens, the Russian Federation of today is the opposite of the Soviet Union. However, if you look at it more closely, Russia has preserved and embraced a lot of the customs that were from the Soviet Union. For example, the state anthem is the same melody of from Russia's state anthem is the same melody as the Soviet Union's state anthem. And the same thing is their celebration of Victory Day, which honors the Soviet Union's sacrifice and victory against the Nazis. Unlike the former Soviet Union, this Russian government actually encourages the celebration of the holiday, and the motivation is to not just like piggyback off of the Soviet Union's success, but also inspire a sense of Russian nationalism.
In a paper from the New York Times, it displayed a T-34 tank passing through the streets of St. Petersburg during a military parade. Military parades have the effect of boosting patriotism and nationalism, and the tank that was used in this was part of the main force that the Soviet Union used to defeat the Nazi Germany in the Eastern Front of World War II. Hence, it highlights the Russian government's attempt to align itself with the former achievements and height of the Soviet Union as a means to promote Russian ambition and justify its influence upon.
Presently, the European Union has expanded to 27 members, which is a lot more than the original six. Although it has been expanded recently, UK, one of the previously most prominent members in the EU, has left. On top of that, there has been increasing skepticism about the EU by Europeans. So, although the European Union has expanded, it's starting to shrink, which is not very good for unity. The European Union has created a unified market through the use of the euro as a standard form of currency. This might look good on paper, pun intended, but there are many countries that are in the union that do not use the euro as their main currency, like Denmark. The lack of a unified currency shows how Europe could get more disunified due to the fact that other key countries that are in the union might begin to use their own currency as well. Another argument is that nationalism exists far more in the older generations, and that as the young people grow up, they will remove that nationalism. There won't really be much nationalism present in the future European society. However, the younger generation is more unified by globalized trends and not specifically unified by the EU. Lots of sports teams are crossing state boundaries and have fans in a wide variety of places.
Thanks for watching. These are our works cited.